everyone, it's Lindey. Welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk about calculating your profits when you're selling liquidation merchandise. So I get a lot of questions about how exactly to calculate your profits when you buy things like a pallet or even just a box lot of liquidation merchandise that you intend to resell on a platform like eBay. And this is honestly not a cut and dry answer to give. I'm always really hesitant to put out any sort of expectation whenever it comes to buying and selling liquidation. But you guys seem to love the videos where I have calculations or some sort of mathematical equation to try to give you a general idea of things. I've done it with the eBay algorithm. I've done it with making $1,000 on Facebook Marketplace. I gave you some examples when I talked about selling, 6,000 items off of a cosmetics pallet. So today I want to give you a couple of basic mathematical equations to try to figure out if you're going to be able to make a profit before you buy the liquidation lots you're looking at. So before we start calculating anything, I want to talk about expectations, because I do think that sometimes with liquidation, there is a big difference between expectation and reality. I think a lot of people that get into reselling start in a place of flipping things from thrift stores or yard sales. And so when they start purchasing liquidation or wholesale merchandise, the expectation is not as accurate as it should be. So there's a lot of disappointment or irritation as a result. Typically, whenever we find items from thrift stores or yard sales, we're paying a very minuscule amount of money and expecting a much larger return. However, with wholesale and liquidation both, that is not necessarily the case. First of all, with wholesale, you are usually dealing with a very, very slim profit margin because you have to pay so much money to acquire the merchandise that you're selling. And typically you'll have to actually buy them in larger quantities, which means you're paying more for the item itself and you're having to sink more money into multiple quantities of this one single item. So if you're wanting to wholesale something like cosmetics or shampoo or AirPods, you're going to have to pay more, not just for the one item, but a whole case of them, which means you have to potentially sink hundreds or thousands of dollars into one single product. And then when you start selling that product, your margins are very, very slim. We're talking about maybe a 10 or a 15% profit. And sometimes that means you're spending $10 to make a $2 profit. And that's just how wholesale works sometimes. Now, liquidation is different from wholesale, but sometimes those same rules still apply. You might not necessarily have to be sinking a large amount of money into one particular product, but you might have to sink a large amount of money into an unknown quantity of different kinds of merchandise. Sometimes those items can be damaged and not sellable. Sometimes those items can have a lot of low value items that maybe nobody wanted, and that's exactly why it's in liquidation. So just because you may get a low unit price in liquidation, you cannot expect the same returns as you would paying a similar price at a thrift store or a yard sale. It's a different family of merchandise. You cannot compare them. So if you're used to paying only a few dollars for merchandise to turn around to sell it for 50 or 60 bucks and make this huge profit margin, just know that that is not going to happen with liquidation. It's unrealistic to think so. I also want to point out that these formulas may or may not be completely accurate depending on the companies that you're buying from. In my experience, there are some liquidation companies out there that are not as consistent or have as much control over their quality issues as other companies out there. There's lots of companies that I've tried that I will no longer source with just because they couldn't get their quality control issues under control. And I was finding that I was spending way too much money buying merchandise that was unsellable versus the little bit that was left that I actually could sell. That's one of the reasons why I always talk about wholesale ninjas so much, because I've been sourcing liquidation since 2019 and I've gone through a lot of companies. And in my experience, Wholesale Ninjas has been the only consistent supplier that I have ever gotten merchandise from. And because they do partner with my YouTube channel, they have given me a coupon code to give to my viewers. And that code is Lindey25 and it gets you $25 off of anything on the Wholesale Ninjas website. So if you are wanting to look at starting to source liquidation, I do highly recommend Wholesale Ninjas. And these formulas that I have are based off of my own personal calculations when sourcing that kind of merchandise that Wholesale Ninjas offers in particular. So if we're talking about other companies out there that may or may not have quality control issues, or they get bad batches of things every once in a while, which every liquidation company does. There are many liquidation companies out there. Every single good company does get bad trucks. So that's why I'm saying that these calculations are, as a general rule, they are not gospel. You could do better than these calculations, or you could do worse depending. So let's talk about my first formula regarding calculating profits for manifested liquidation. Also, for anyone that is new to buying liquidation or wholesale and you're not exactly sure what the terms manifested or unmanifested means, a manifest is basically just a list of what is in the order that you're about ready to place. So if something is manifested, you should have a list of items that you can look through to verify whether or not you want to purchase this lot. Unmanifested is essentially another word for mystery box. If something is unmanifested, whatever is inside is a complete mystery. There might be an idea category, like with Wholesale Ninjas, I prefer to get the unmanifested personal care lots as opposed to the manifested, but it is a gamble. It's always a gamble when you buy unmanifested because you don't know what you're going to get. So that's the difference between manifested and unmanifested. All right, so let's get started with the first calculation for profits for a manifested liquidation lot. For this, you are going to need the purchase price of the lot itself, as well as the estimated retail value for the entire lot. That's everything inside. And if there is a manifest, you should have a dollar amount of the total estimated retail value of the entire purchase order. All right, get your pen and paper. Here's the formula. I'll do the formula first and then we'll get an example. You're going to take the total estimated retail value minus 50%, minus 38% for your selling costs, minus the cost of goods equals your profit. Retail value minus 50%, minus 38%, minus cost of goods equals profit. Here's the example. Let's say that you're looking at a pallet of merchandise that's an estimated retail value of $10,000. This basically means that the company selling this pallet says that according to the manifest, the retail value of everything on this pallet totals $10,000. First thing you're gonna do is you're gonna take that $10,000 and you're gonna take off 50%. Because I don't care what any company says, retail value is not resale value. You would be lucky to be able to sell or resell merchandise at 50% of whatever someone thinks the retail value is. So we're gonna take $10,000 minus 50%, which leaves $5,000 worth of value. So then we're gonna take the $5,000 and we're going to subtract 38%. 38% would be $1,900. That 38% is representing any selling costs for selling online. And we're using eBay for this example because eBay is the online site that I talk the most about selling online with. So if everything on that pallet sells for $5,000, you're going to have to pay roughly 38% in selling costs, which leaves you with $3,100. So now we take that $3,100 and we subtract the cost of goods. Let's say that this pallet that is valued at $10,000 costs you $1,500. So now we're going to take $3,100 minus $1,500 for the actual cost of the pallet, which leaves us with a $1,600 profit. So in this example, the retail value of this pallet is $10,000. It will cost you as the reseller $1,500. And using this formula I just gave you, you should be able to make a roughly $1,600 profit, which means you would basically be doubling your money in profit. So essentially for every dollar you've spent on inventory, you'll be getting a dollar in profit. And this is pretty typical when we're talking about doing liquidation. There's a lot of times profit margins are more like 50%. You might make 50 cents profit for every dollar you spend in inventory, but if you're able to get a really good deal, or if you find a reputable supplier that's really consistent with their inventory, that's when you get more into the territory of making dollar for dollar. You put out $1 for your inventory and then you make back $2, which is a $1 profit. So now let's talk about how I like to calculate estimated profits based on an unmanifested liquidation order. This one can get a little bit more tricky because if you're dealing with a company that's not very consistent, which again is why I really like Wholesale Ninjas because they are the most consistent company I've ever sourced with. If you have inconsistency, it's really hard to find a formula that works the best. But this is the one that I've come up with based on my own personal experience sourcing liquidation for nearly 3 years. And that's what I like to call the 3X rule. In this formula, you take how much the pallet is going to cost you times 3, so cost of goods multiplied by 3, then you take that number minus your 38% selling costs, and then you take that number minus the original cost of the pallet, and that equals your profit. So let's do an example so you could see these numbers in action. Let's go back to that original $10,000 value pallet, but we don't know it's worth $10,000 because it's unmanifested. There is just a pallet that exists that someone is charging us $1,500 for, and we want to know if we think we're going to be able to make any profit. So if that pallet costs $1,500, we're going to take $1,500 and multiply that by 3. That gives us $4,500. Then we are going to take $4,500 and we are going to subtract the 38% for our estimated selling costs, which means we are taking $4,500 minus $1,710, leaving us with $2,790. Then we are going to take that number and we are going to subtract the original cost of the pallet, which was the $1,500, leaving us with an estimated profit of $1,290. So you could see how this formula is a lot more conservative than the first one. So we used the same pallet in the example, but it was unmanifested. So we always have to be a little bit more conservative with our formulas and our equations when it comes to unmanifested because there's a lot more unknown factors. So in this same example, if this pallet were unmanifested and all we knew was the actual cost of the pallet, based on that formula, we would be making a $1,290 profit, which is a little less than 2x our money. So that calculation would tell us that we would be making a little less than $1 in profit for every dollar we spent on inventory, when in the other equation, we were making a little more than $1 per dollar spent on inventory. So I know that these math equations can be a little bit confusing when I'm just saying them out loud. So down in the video description, I will definitely make sure to kind of write them out. And I'll also post some examples down there as well so you can actually see the equation being worked with actual numbers. But honestly, as a general rule, whenever it comes to sourcing liquidation, my goal is very, very clear. And that is to get my cost of goods per unit so low that I would have to actually try hard not to make money. That's why I try to never pay more than $2 for a single unit. Because when we're talking about a $2 cost of goods, you could sell those items at $6 or $7 and still turn a profit. But when you are selling merchandise that's a lot more expensive, that's when it gets a little bit more tricky. That's when your capital is a lot more at risk and your profit margins get smaller and smaller because you're not exactly sure what kind of margins you're going to have to work with. That's why I always say source with the companies that have the most consistent quality control and have the lowest unit prices that you can find. That way it'd be really hard not to make money. Something else that I also want to point out is because a lot of the times liquidation, you're dealing with a lot lower profit margin, like I gave you in those examples, we're talking dollar profit for every dollar spent on inventory. So if you pay $1 for something, you might only make $1 profit. So a lot of the times when you are selling lower margin items, you do need to operate off of volume. And when you are either working by yourself or you are trying to build up a store and have multiple listings, when you're working off of volume, multiple quantity items are completely necessary. I have numerous items in my eBay store that I might only make $2 or $3 profit on, but I have multiple quantities of those listings. So if those items were to sell, I don't have to put in the manpower to create listings to replace them. I can simply add quantities or replenish stock. That's something else to consider when you're doing something like liquidation. A lot of the times you have to move off of volume. time. Sometimes you do have to take some losses for unsellable merchandise. That's why I wanted to stress the importance of expectation with this kind of merchandise. But hopefully these equations have helped you try to figure out how much profit you can make for dollars spent on inventory. Make sure to give the video a thumbs up if you like content like this and you appreciate my time putting it together. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already and ring that notification bell. Don't forget to check out the video description. Just expand the box down there and I will have these formulas typed out for you so that you can easily see them. I'll also have my Wholesale Ninjas coupon code in there in case you want to try out a liquidation lot that they have. I'll also make sure to link to some of my favorite lots on their site. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them down in the comments below. Thank you guys again so much for watching. I will see you with my next video. Bye-bye.